Introduction. With the advent of many sophisticated technologies in our contemporary society, many inquire as to how far we can truly take our technological advancements. This has given rise to a transhumanism movement, and the belief that we should use technology to enhance ourselves and to circumvent the limitations that our biological forms have imposed upon us. Such pursuits appear to be equally dangerous as they may be beneficial, not to mention idealistic. This is a message I shall be emphasizing throughout this video, as I believe it to be very important to not align oneself wholly on one side of the debate, that is, staunchly advocating for or against technological advancement, and, in particular, technological advancement that is seen to enhance the human condition. I shall first outline the varying definitions of transhumanism and which forms of technology could be regarded as being transhuman. I shall also emphasize the contentious nature of defining the term and how there are many different interpretations to be made in regards to it. Next, I shall explain how transhumanist technology is being applied within society and how many envision it being applied in the future, touching on some ethical issues associated with these technologies. Following this, I shall delve fully into the ethics of transhumanism, expanding on some of the issues raised in the prior section, as well as raising some further considerations. I will also discuss whether I believe many of the propositions made by the movement can be feasibly developed, or indeed whether we are already seeing them be applied within society. Finally, I shall discuss my own stance on transhumanism, primarily taking into account the ethical issues raised in the ethics section in doing so. Defining transhumanism. While the definition of transhumanism is relatively contentious, it can be broadly defined as a philosophical stance and scientific movement that advocates the enhancement of the human condition through the application of sophisticated technologies in an attempt to improve quality of life. The reason why defining transhumanism is contentious is because many have varying stances pertaining to which technologies constitute transhuman technologies. Some would argue that any technology that enhances a human's quality of life through an extension of one's physical form could be regarded as transhuman technology. A computer, for example, or perhaps even objects as basic as knives and forks. Whether we can regard basic tools as technology is an inconclusive matter. What we are sure of, however, is that they often do benefit us to such a degree that we begin to forget they even exist, instead regarding them as being part of ourselves. In this case, we could argue that even primitive humans would be transhuman. However, many would not agree with this stance on transhumanism, myself included. The crucial point to note in the definition I've provided is the sophisticated nature of the technology. This encompasses much of the technology we see nowadays. I'd also like to point out, though, that there is another debate to be had whether these technologies actually do enhance our quality of life, which may well not be the case given the detrimental effects of much technology. We can see this in a decline in mental health within contemporary society and the myriad dangers associated with internet use, such as the likelihood of witnessing disturbing content or engaging with trolls. Conversely, we have been provided with a wealth of information that can essentially allow us to learn whatever we see fit, whenever we see fit. This overabundance of information will not always be regarded as being valuable, though. The information itself may not even be veracious for that matter, as it need not be shared by authority sources. The prevalence of misinformation on the internet could be regarded as being as much of a detriment as the prevalence of authentic information is a benefit. What is undeniable, though, is that the conveniences, such as online shopping and online booking systems, have improved our quality of life. This debate is ultimately a matter of perspective. Some will regard technology in higher esteem, whereas some will not. What we should be able to agree on, though, is that technology is not a universal good. It is a multifaceted consideration. Some advocates of transhumanism add a greater degree of specificity to their definition of the term. They argue that the development of technology, usually in the form of augmentations that serve to enhance aspects of a human being, such as their cognition or longevity, are transhumanist endeavors. This is not technology that we see being particularly prevalent in contemporary society, at least not to a great extent. Human beings are still almost solely biological. The technology is still predominantly external to us. We do have some internal technology, however, such as pacemakers, which advocates of this definition would likely consider transhumanist technology. We also have internal technology that serves an extension of ourselves, such as prosthetic limbs, and so we can see that transhumanist technology on this definition is already getting some spotlight. We should not merely regard it as being an idealistic endeavor for the far future. Personally, I advocate for the definition of transhumanism I provided earlier, and this definition is the one I shall conform to throughout this video, for I believe it to be widely encompassing and reflective of the great extent to which technology is influencing our lives. Applications of transhumanism. As we have discussed, I believe transhumanism to already be relatively prevalent within contemporary society, although this stance is not often acknowledged. When many consider transhumanism, they immediately begin to set their sights to the future. They set their sights to sci-fi cities occupied by beings that take their technological nature as being a significant defining aspect of themselves. Some would refer to them as cyborgs, some would still regard them as human. They could also be considered objectively superior to us. Perhaps they are stronger, more agile, more intelligent, more durable. Perhaps they live for far longer than ourselves, and their technologically augmented bodies no longer require food for sustenance, and they charge themselves instead using electricity. Certainly as idealistic to dream of such beings, as they are more machine than human. We have not yet made great strides in this regard, as I mentioned earlier, and so we can only hypothesize as to what characteristics they could possess. Some may even envision us foregoing our biological forms entirely and instead transitioning to robotic forms. We could regard this as transcending our biology and the impositions it bestows upon us. We may no longer need to contend with harmful desires, such as a disposition towards addiction, and as we need not factor them into the cognition of these robotic forms. This does raise some critical questions, though. How far do we take this? And are these artificial forms truly us, or should we regard them as being new entities? In all actuality, I'd say the answer to the first question is likely to be more dystopian in nature. Once we realize that we can forego our biological limitations and desires that are regarded as being unfruitful, unproductive, or harmful, then they may be ruled out. However, such desires and limitations are what makes us human. If we no longer have them, then we could be broadly characterized as being merely automatons that act on the whims of those who command us. We may see hobbies that we indulge in for our own pleasure and not for productivity be dismissed entirely, and see productivity take precedence. This would entirely undermine the notion of a work-life balance. Should we even regard this as being a negative, though? If these artificial forms can be cognitively programmed so as to not derive pleasure from these hobbies, then to what end would the hobbies even serve? Why should we prioritize a work-life balance if the incentive for pursuing the life or recreation aspect is no longer appealing to us? I feel as though these are questions we can't truly address, given the biases we are subjected to as biological beings who are programmed to enjoy deriving pleasure from various activities. Perhaps we could say then that our likely aversion towards this prospect indicates that we would lose our identities with these fundamental changes. We would no longer be human from a cognitive standpoint. We can even take a stance that questions the intrinsic value of productivity. Surely productivity has no value without our biological forms. Our biological forms are what dictates that which we ascribe value to. If we lack them, then is it possible to definitively say that there is value in anything? When transhumanism is brought up, many also envision a system that is able to store human consciousness. An external host, so to speak, uploading your mind to the cloud. We could liken this to the aforementioned robotic forms, although this notion pertains more so to a storage system that can be used to retain human consciousness and enhance longevity. Many also associate this idealistic proposition accompanying a virtual reality system, in which the human consciousness could reside within, allowing them to forego living in the real world entirely. Theoretically, this virtual world would allow us to construct a utopia. We would be able to control all the variables associated with it, as it would be a reality of our own design. I would not liken this to a utopia, however. I believe there are more dangerous connotations associated with it. We could definitively say that the owner of such a system would also own every consciousness that exists within it. They have full dominion over them, and we could liken them to a god. This is particularly concerning as humans are not infallible. We are prone to making decisions that are detrimental towards the well-being of others, and many authority figures throughout history have been known to exercise their power in cruel and arbitrary ways. I believe that our aspirations for such a system should be predicated on whether we are more willing to place ourselves at the mercy of the universe, nature, God, depending on your spiritual persuasion, or a human or organization. While I do find the latter to be less appealing, the benefits of such a utopia should not be readily dismissed. It is possible that we would no longer need to be concerned by that which ails us in our biological forms, and we could exist in a state of mind reflective of unmitigated bliss. But with this consideration, similar questions to before are raised. For example, are we sacrificing crucial aspects of our identity for what we perceive to be the greater good? If the owner of this virtual world is able to influence that which you find pleasurable, are you still you? If we shift our perspective back to the applications of transhumanism in contemporary society, we can see individuals who are already undertaking technological augmentation procedures that they believe will enhance their quality of life. I raised some examples pertaining to this earlier. pacemakers and prosthetic limbs. However, there are also some more obscure procedures taking place that, in many cases, have a high degree of risk associated with them. Technological augmentation can be ordered online and integrated into the body at the volition of the customer. For example, we have chips that can be integrated into the wrist that provide the individual with more convenience in regards to how they interact with the world around them. These chips can be used to unlock the door to their house or car, and they can render the need for passwords to protect their devices obsolete, as this chip can verify their identity. It can be taken as a defining aspect of the individual, an extension of themselves, and a claim to their property. Should we regard these people as being transhuman? Their quality of life has, after all, been raised by enhancing the human condition through the use of sophisticated technologies, and so I would, by virtue of my definition, regard them as being such. We should also consider how transhumanist technology could be applied to enhance, or, depending on your perspective, to undermine our society. For example, with extensive advancements in neuropsychological and scientific research, we could devise technological augmentations that could enhance our intelligence. This could lead to us being predisposed towards skilled professions, and we could then see a reduced willingness for individuals to take on jobs that are often perceived as being low skill. While this may be beneficial for a society in regards to areas such as technological, scientific, and medical advancement, a lack of willingness to partake in these alleged low-skilled jobs would undermine the fundamentals of the society. It could perhaps be argued that an advancement in cognition would not be of overall benefit to a society, given how such jobs, in my view, should be regarded as being just as important as high-skilled jobs, given how they are conducive to the upkeep of the society itself. Without upkeep, those high-skilled jobs cannot be supported. Ethical implications of transhumanism. One of the most prominent issues that is raised due to the advocacy of transhumanism is that of ethics. If we take a look at the advanced society in which we reside, we can see, even now, that there is a clear divide between those who are permitted access to technology and those who are not. Termed the digital divide, it stipulates that those who are less well off are naturally going to be unable to access technology to the same extent as others, perhaps due to financial constraints or the environment in which they live. The prevalence of technology in third world countries, for example, is drastically reduced in comparison to Western countries. Underpinning this divide is capitalism, a socio-economic system that dictates the value of an individual on the basis of the labor they provide. As a result, this system will not permit an egalitarian perspective towards technology. There will always be people who will be more privileged and will have greater access to technology than others. As transhumanism endeavors continue to accelerate, this issue will continue to be exacerbated. And what we will likely see is that this divide will widen. The less privileged will always be far behind the curve in regards to technology, and they may only be permitted access to it once others already regard it as being obsolete. Once these enhancements begin to affect us internally, this disparity in condition will be more pronounced. The privileged may reap the benefits of a cognitive or physical enhancement augmentation, for example, which will facilitate the development of a new form of discrimination. The belief in the inferiority of the human and the superiority of the transhuman. Some of those that have been enhanced by these technologies will believe that they have dominion over those who have not. This may even incentivize physical assault if strength enhancement augmentations, bionic arms for example, were to be used by a transhuman. They may be able to oppress others with impunity. Subsequently, it appears as though humans will become obsolete, outdated, and transhumans will take center stage as being the next rung on the ladder of an artificially instigated evolutionary process of man. They will likely be regarded as being a different race entirely, resulting in a dystopian world for the human that is perceived as being inferior. This issue is further emphasized by the nature of the differences between the two states of human. Racism, for example, is predicated on an arbitrary and non-significant difference in physical characteristics. In this case, we cannot logically and feasibly regard one race as being inferior to the other. The primary danger with transhumanism, though, is that we most certainly can here. The transhuman could become physically and cognitively superior to the human, thus providing them with the rationale they believe will justify oppression. Perhaps the transhumans will not be in good stead either, though. When they agree to enhance themselves using these technologies, they are in a way providing whoever distributes the technology to them with some form of dominion over them. We can even see this, although to a less pronounced extent, within our present-day interactions with various organizations. When we interact with a website, for example, we often permit the owners of the website to gather information about ourselves and to dictate how we use the site. We agree to terms of service that can be used to justify various actions that are taken against ourselves. If a YouTube video is perceived as being inappropriate, it is taken down, and in some cases, the account it is associated with is terminated. We're already being controlled in some ways, and many of these organizations have a wealth of information pertaining to our online habits at their disposal. As technology continues to develop, privacy and control continue to diminish. The more reliant we are on technology in which we possess, the more we must conform to those who are providing us with access to it. This process becomes even more problematic when we consider the notion of internal technology. In this case, aspects of the organization that is implemented it are now fundamentally instilled within us. When we permit them to control our physical forms, we provide them with immeasurable power, and I would argue that this is a considerable cause for concern. Many of us already gloss over terms of service due to their excessive nature, and oftentimes this can eventually bite us in the back, given how we have essentially signed a consent form without fully examining what said consent form entails. If we were to follow such a path of technological advancement, we would naturally continue to stray further and further from an egalitarian regime. We will have less freedom, and we will have less rights, for we will be deferring to those who hold the power over us, those who have conditioned us to be reliant on the technology in which they provide. This issue, as I have touched on earlier, also pervades the notion of consciousness transferal. Once your consciousness resides within that external system, you have now fully submitted yourself to whoever owns it. They have complete authority over your being. They could choose to tamper with your consciousness, or perhaps even delete it entirely if they see fit. I believe this is just simply far too much power to give any person or organization, regardless of how much we may trust them. The virtual reality aspect, if it were to attempt to fully conform to the human condition, would also necessitate the existence of artificial suffering. The ability to experience both physical and emotional pain within your virtual body and mind. This is perhaps even more concerning than the possession of one's consciousness, as there are myriad unpleasant and iniquitous circumstances and events that may be imposed upon this virtual person. We can then perhaps regard this, for all intents and purposes, as being our new reality. A reality that is governed solely by another. Feasibility of transhumanism. We've discussed the potential applications of transhumanism, but the crucial consideration to be made is whether or not such applications are even feasible. As I've mentioned previously, it is entirely possible to internalize technology, and in the case of bionic limbs and pacemakers, for example, we can even see technology interface with the body itself. These bionic limbs are controlled by electrical signals from muscles and nerves, allowing them to serve as an artificial replacement for their biological alternatives. However, such technology is not yet sophisticated enough to replicate the full extent of biological functioning. Those who have these limbs attached to their body are unable to experience any sensation associated with them, although research is being conducted on the possibility of feelings being transferred back to the body. So we can already see that the physical augmentation aspect of transhumanism is feasible, at least to an extent. We could, in theory, already have people enhance their physical attributes using these bionic limbs in order to excel in areas such as strength training, to provide them with an advantage over others. However, given how this technology is still in its infancy, it's yet to become a widespread, to the extent where we could ascribe it great ethical consideration. The enhanced cognition aspect of transhumanism does not appear to be nearly as feasible, however, at least not on the basis of our current neuropsychological understanding. At this juncture, we are unable to even associate much of our cognitive faculties with particular brain regions. While we have been able to ascertain some of these regions, Broca's area being associated with language comprehension, for example, variances are apparent here. Some regions of the brain serve different purposes for different people, meaning that a unique brain map must be devised for each person. Some regions of the brain also work in tandem to achieve a particular end, which demonstrates how complex an organ it truly is. It cannot simply be likened to a computer system whereby each component, take the central processing unit for example, has a clearly defined purpose in which there is no deviation. Another pertinent consideration is the phenomenon of brain plasticity. It has been noted that the brain can, at least to some extent, account for faulty or damaged brain regions by allowing other regions of the brain to fulfill that function. A woman who was born without a Broca's area, for example, was still able to demonstrate normal speech, indicating that the intact right half of her brain may have taken over responsibility for this function. What all of these factors demonstrate is how infeasible cognitive enhancement is likely to be, as we are, at present, unable to discern much of how the human brain carries out its processes, let alone how to enhance aspects of cognition. We could perhaps argue that given how drugs such as antidepressants mitigate undesirable processes occurring within the brain, this could be likened to cognitive enhancement. However, we are not making considerable progress in terms of improving the efficiency and efficacy of what is already there, at least not in regards to the cognitive faculties that we often associate with intelligence. Our understanding of the human brain, while superficial and in its early stages, can still be taken to show promise for the future in regards of transhumanism. We have discovered how the brain's fundamental processes occur. There is not a specific neuron that is fired with each specific occurrence. Instead, a network of interconnected neurons work together to produce outcomes. This indicates that attempting to look at the brain as a system that operates on the basis of a plethora of conditional if statements may be ill-advised, as the brain does not follow this process of decision-making. As we have discovered, it is through this network of neurons that we are able to learn. Humans seldom come with pre-programmed responses, impulses, and intuitions. Much of our behavior, such as social etiquette, language, and how to live within our society, is a result of learning. By attempting to replicate this neuron network artificially, we have been able to devise what are referred to as artificial neural networks. These networks facilitate learning in a similar manner to the human brain, albeit with a considerably smaller and simplified system. This tells us then that the future may hold promise for the development of artificial minds that could potentially serve as hosts for a consciousness. What's important to note, though, is that this is still very idealistic. The transferal of consciousness could be likened to the extreme of cognitive enhancement. To do this, we would need to have studied and have been aware of all of the vast number of intricacies intrinsic to the human brain and how these interact to produce a functioning system whereby each aspect of cognition works in harmony. We would then require the expertise in order to replicate it artificially. I would see this as being infeasible, as to understand such a system would be to transcend ourselves intellectually, as this would likely be the precursor for us being able to even comprehend it. I perhaps argue that it may be possible to carry out this process if we were to evolve a level of intelligence far beyond that which we currently possess. Although still, to even comprehend a brain that is vastly inferior to our own would be a very extensive and arduous process, if even possible at all. This could be taken to indicate that the artificial minds that we produce to store human consciousness would always be far behind our cognitive capabilities, and to use them as a form of storage would be to greatly undermine ourselves, perhaps rendering the artificial mind cognitively stunted and the original consciousness irretrievable. There is also no evidence to suggest that a consciousness could even exist external to a brain, and we are still unable to ascertain what gives rise to consciousness in the first place and what it truly is. We're already able to extend the longevity of a human being through our technological advancements. Antibiotics, for example, have greatly increased the average human's lifespan, and we have even gone so far as to develop total artificial hearts that are able to perform the functions of a biological heart, which will continue to function on average for around 5 years. However, due to our lack of knowledge on aging, we are currently not able to artificially extend a human being's lifespan through the enhancement of organs, and it may still be a while yet before we are able to fully pursue this commonly cited aspect of transhumanism. So, what is my stance on transhumanism? While many may feel inclined to regard technological advancement as being a good thing, I am a little apprehensive to accept this sentiment. As I have argued in the applications and ethics sections, the promulgation of intrusive technologies that fundamentally alter the human condition paves the way for a shift in power dynamic. The organizations that control these technologies will greatly influence our lives and continue to exercise their control over them. Even nowadays, we're almost wholly reliant on technology to conduct our day-to-day lives, and tech companies have quickly soared to unprecedented heights. If we permit this process to continue, their influence and power is likely only to grow greater. What I also find to be particularly troubling is the nature of capitalism and the great lengths that many organizations are willing to go in order to bring in profit and to exploit others. One example that comes to mind is the research that was conducted by the scientists of ExxonMobil. These scientists made accurate predictions pertaining to global warming and the detrimental effects that burning fossil fuels would have on the climate. Despite this, however, ExxonMobil chose not to bring the information to light, as it was not in their financial interest to do so, given their prominent place in the oil industry. What we need to remember is that all of these organizations are ultimately pursuing the same thing: profit, and they often have no qualms in foregoing ethics to achieve this end. I would infer that the vast majority of technology will be designed with this same principle in mind, and that leaves me justifiably concerned for the future. Ultimately, I believe that the further we stray from our biological form and the more we pursue transhumanism, the more we will lose touch with ourselves and our identities, the culmination of this being our stripping of our rights and our autonomy. I do understand that these technologies can and already have improved our quality of life, but I also believe that we should avoid taking our technological progress too far, as to do so will undermine that which many of us value the most: freedom. Conclusion/recap. To conclude, I initiated this video with a discussion pertaining to the definition of transhumanism, and have considered multiple views in regards to this before settling on a definition for me to adhere to. Advocacy for sophisticated technologies that enhance the human condition, such as physical condition or cognition, in an attempt to improve one's quality of life. Its definition is generally in line with what many would regard the goal of the movement being. In the application segment, I attempted to envision what transhumans would look like and what characteristics they may possess, raising some questions pertaining to individuality and intrinsic values in the process. I also raised the notion of consciousness transferal and the implications this may have, touching on some similar questions and outlining some ethical issues. Following this, I discussed how these technologies are being applied in the present day, and why the application of transhuman technology may be both beneficial and detrimental to a society at large, using the example of enhanced cognition. In the ethics segment, I started by arguing how the advent of these transhuman technologies will further exacerbate issues of inequality and serve to widen a division between those who have access to them and those who do not. I then explained how this inequality and disparity in physical characteristics may lead to discrimination between proposed humans and transhumans, as they may use their enhancements to oppress the less privileged. I then argued against transhumans, explaining why their freedom and rights may be undermined as a result to their deference to the tech organizations that are enhancing them. I concluded this segment by considering the ethics of consciousness transferal, emphasizing that the same issues pervade this proposition. In the feasibility section, I argued for and against the transhumanist technologies that I had previously raised in the video in regards to whether we could feasibly implement them now or in the future. The physical augmentation discussion primarily centered around bionic limbs and how they have been able to interface with the human body in order to serve a similar purpose to their biological counterparts, thus demonstrating their feasibility. In the other two sections, enhanced cognition and longevity, I argued why psychological and scientific research do not currently and may never permit the idealistic advances commonly raised in regards to transhumanism. Finally, I described why I am personally concerned by a future pervaded by transhumanist advances. In doing so, I emphasized the importance of the ethical issues raised earlier on during the video, arguing that the reduced freedom and heightened influence of tech organizations predisposes me in aversion towards the movement, at least in regards to internalized technologies.